Hello, my dear students. I hope you are all safe. I hope you are all hale and hearty, and I hope everyone at your place is safe. I record this video with the hope that life will go back to normalcy very soon, and that we will be able to see each other in a classroom environment very soon. In this video, we will finish off Article 19. We've looked at Article 19(1)(a) and the reasonable restrictions to the freedom of speech and expression that is contained in 19(2). In today's video, we will look at Articles 19(1)(b) to 19(1)(g). That is basically the right to assembly in 19(1)(b), the right to form associations in 19(1)(c), the freedom of movement guaranteed in 19(1)(d), the freedom of residence in 19(1)(e), and of course, most importantly, the freedom to practice any trade, profession, business, or occupation. And then we will look at the reasonable restrictions that are contained within 19(3) to 19(6). So what does 19(1)(b) say? 19(1)(b) guarantees the right of assembly. The article says that peaceful, unarmed protests are a right that is available, and they take you back. Article 19 freedoms are available only to the citizens of this country, and therefore peaceful, unarmed protests are a right that is available to every Indian citizen. Recently, you must have come across a case where a certain student who was on an exchange program in IIT Chennai was deported. That is because it was considered to be a violation of his visa conditions. And the question was, he has the right to protest, just like every other Indian student. And the government was very clear. They said, no, the right to protest is only available to Indian citizens. And since he was German, which is obviously not Indian, he does not have the right to exercise the fundamental right to protest. Protests, of course, is a combination of 19(1)(a), which is speech and expression, and 19(1)(b), which is assembly. In the United States case of US versus Cruikshank, which is 1875, the Supreme Court of the United States very clearly said that in a republican form of government, that is, in a government where there is no king, the people govern themselves, the head of the state is a representative of the people, an elected representative of the people, the right to assemble and protest, the right to assemble and discuss public affairs is inherent. So in US versus Cruikshank, as early as 1875, nearly 140 years ago, the Supreme Court very clearly said that, or the Supreme Court of the United States very clearly said that in a republican democratic system, people should be able to come together and talk about the public affairs. And if this turns out to be a protest, then so be it. This right cannot be taken away from the people. The reasonable restrictions that are imposed on the right to assembly are on the basis of public order, on the basis of sovereignty, on the basis of sovereignty and integrity. I'm sorry. And we must understand that within this fold, public safety, tranquility, these things are contained. So the meaning that public order, sovereignty and integrity, these things have, in 19(2), they apply as is to 19(3). So and this is reflected in the CRPC. So sections 107 and 111 of the CRPC allows a magistrate to obtain a security, that is a bond or some amount of money or some property that has a certain value. This can be obtained from a person who this magistrate thinks is a threat to the public order. Public order within its fold contains public safety, peace, tranquility, so on and so forth. So, although there are only public order and sovereignty and integrity that is mentioned, the scope is much wider than what we think it is, than what is prima facie. But at the same time, because of the democratic setup that we have in India, because of the republican setup that we have in India, and because the Supreme Court is vested with the powers, not just the Supreme Court, of course, the High Court also, they're vested with the powers of judicial review. Despite it actually being wide, it's still narrow because the fundamental rights, although there are various headings and therefore it might look wide, the scope itself is, they try to keep it as minimum as possible because we want to give maximum rights to the people. Uh, However, there is a problem. In India, you can't just go out and protest. You need to obtain permission from the police. That is the police's way of making sure that, and that is the state's way of making sure that you don't breach public peace, you don't breach public order, and you're not, exceeding the limit of the right that is guaranteed to you. And the problem lies here. Police laws in India, they've been accused of being very outdated. Police laws in India, usually police laws and police guidelines, usually are outdated to an extent where um, they're almost 150 years old. The reason why these laws were made in such a narrow manner back then was because we were a colonized country and we didn't have freedoms. That's not true anymore, and therefore the police laws need to be relooked at. But either which way, usually the police cannot and will not deny the permission to protest. Uh, and although there is a need to get the permission is usually granted quite easily. But we need to relook our police laws. Now I come to 19(1)(c), which is the right to form associations and unions, and this includes cooperative societies. Cooperative societies was a recent insertion. The amendment was made and it was added recently. But this ability to form unions, so you to express yourself, you come together and you organize yourself in a formal manner. That is the flow. You can see this happening. The right to form a trade union, however, or the right to form an association, or the right to form some organized body, is, however, not directly linked to the ultimate goal. So if the state allows us to form a trade union, then the assumption is not only that you have the fundamental right to form a trade union. The assumption is not that the ultimate goal of the trade union will be achieved. So the trade union is formed for the welfare of the people and to welfare of the workers, and to increase their wages and increase their living standards and working conditions. That is the goal of the trade union. There is no guarantee that all these goals will be achieved, and if it is not achieved, you cannot say that it is a violation of fundamental right. It is a right to form an association. There is no right for the association to reach its ultimate goal. No. So which is why you have the fundamental right to form an association, but you don't have the fundamental right to issue an order of a strike. You do not have the fundamental right to issue an order as a trade union, in your capacity as a trade union, to issue an order where you ask the people to stop working. You cannot do that. You don't have a fundamental right. You can do that, but the restrictions that are placed on it need not be reasonable restrictions under Article 19(4). They don't need to come from there. So there can be other statutory regulations also, but of course these regulations also need to be just fair and reasonable. They need to meet the guidelines laid down. They need to meet the standards laid down by the Constitution. All of these principles are valid, but at the same time, the same standard of a fundamental right is not applied to these statutory rights of strikes and lockouts. Just like the right to circulate your newspaper is integral to the right to freedom of speech and expression, which is the right to press, which is a part of the right to freedom of speech and expression. Similarly, you don't merely have the right to form an association, you also have the right to continue the association. So, I form a trade union or I form an association, and then the government lets me form the association, but 2 months later just bans it. Says that we're not letting you. Then 2 months, then you form another association, they ban you again. No. The purpose of an association can only be served if it is allowed to continue. If they don't let you continue, then what is the purpose? If you are allowed to publish a paper but you're not allowed to circulate it, then what is the purpose? Similarly, you're allowed to form an association but you're not allowed to go forward with it. Every 2 months they're banning you, then what is the purpose of it? They can ban you, but that needs to be reasonable. And how is it reasonable? Provided it meets the conditions that are laid down under 19 clause 4. Sovereignty and integrity, public order, morality. So you cannot come together to form something immoral. So morality again is subject to standards that are laid down by the court. It's different from case to case. But having said that, some things are evidently illegal. You can't come together to form an association that trades in human beings, which is a violation of different people's fundamental rights. It's obvious that you can't do things like that. It's against public morality. It's against order. It's against it's not against the sovereignty and integrity of India, but at the same time, it's against a a lot of other moral standards that apply across the board. I think it is illegal, but it is also immoral to everyone from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Gujarat to Arunachal Pradesh, that trading in human beings and indulging in illegal activities is immoral. I mean, so there are no two questions about it. And to declare an association or an organization or a trade union as illegal and to stop them from operating, there needs to be clear law. This law can be any law as defined in Article 13. And this was said in State of Madras versus V.G. Rao, 1952. There needs to be a clear-cut law. This can be an order, this can be ordinance, statutory law, bylaw, whatever. But it needs to be clear law as defined under Article 13. So it cannot be arbitrary. So again, you see the link between multiple fundamental rights. For a restriction to be reasonable, it needs to meet standards of arbitrariness, absence of arbitrariness that are laid down under Article 14. Now we move to Article 19(1)(t), right to movement, and this is closely linked to Article 19(1)(e), which is freedom of residence. So freedom of movement and freedom of residence are heavily interlinked, and that is why the reasonable restrictions also are the same as laid down under 19(5). The restrictions under 19(5) were also applicable to 19(1)(f), which was the right to property, which has been removed, and we'll come to that momentarily. Right to move around. What does this article try and tell you? It says that an Indian citizen should not be stopped from going to some other part of India, because to properly express oneself, maybe someone needs to go somewhere else to work, and through that work they will earn money, and then they will express themselves in different ways, in ways that they are not able to express themselves now. So we can't restrict them. So 19, there's a clear flow. There's a clear link. You have the right to express yourself. To express yourself, you're allowed to come together with people. Once you come together with people, if you feel that there needs to be a formal organization, you're allowed to form an association. Once the association is formed, if that requires you to move around, or in general to express yourself, if there is a need for you to move around, you have that right. And while moving around, if you want to stay in some place, if you want to reside in some other place that is not your hometown, that right is also given to you. While staying there, while moving around, you have the right to do a certain kind of job, which is not restricted. There's a clear flow from 19(1)(a) to 19(1)(g). That's something that you need to understand. So what do the restrictions under 19(5) say? They say that for 19(1)(t), which is the right to movement, 19(1)(e), which is the right to residence, and the former 19(1)(f), which is the right to property, if the interests of the general public are affected, or if the interests of the scheduled tribe community is affected, then reasonable restrictions can be imposed. So no sovereignty and integrity in this context, no public order, blah blah blah, none of that. Interest of the general public and scheduled tribe. But herein lies the catch. Interest of the general public of India are affected if the sovereignty and integrity of India is affected. The general public of India, their interests are harmed if public order, decency, morality are affected. If you are causing some kind of antisocial, if you are the reason for some antisocial activities, then maybe you shouldn't be allowed to move around and you shouldn't be allowed to reside in a certain place. So again, by keeping it very, very simple and small prima facie, there is an appearance that the scope is very wide, but at the same time, within these two limited words, there's a universe within itself, because the scope of these two words are very vast. Interest of the general public is such a vast, undefined term, undefined because you cannot define it. Any exercise of defining it is only going to be a futile exercise. And therefore, no one tries to define it. On a case-to-case basis, we look at it. See, the general interests can be anything, and this general interest of the public is what prevents civilian population from entering military installations or government installations. You cannot just go and live next to an Air Force base if the Air Force uh, officers don't want you living there, or the government does not want you living there, you can't do that. It's as simple as that. There's also a clear link between Article 19(1)(d), the freedom of movement, and personal liberty under 21. So in Khadak Singh versus in Khadak Singh versus Uttar Pradesh, and subsequently in Govind versus Madhya Pradesh, this link was this connection was examined. In Khadak Singh, the court refused to accept the relation between 19(1)(d) and 21, but this position was reversed in Govind. And in Govind, it was said that there is a clear link between personal liberty and the right to move around. My liberty is restricted under 21 if I am not allowed to move around under 19(1)(d). However, if the procedure established by law is followed and this procedure is just, fair and reasonable, then my personal liberty under 21 is also not affected. Right to residence under 19(1)(e) is also largely similar to what is being said here in 19(1)(d). And the same principles apply, same general interest of the public and interests of the scheduled tribe community. See, scheduled tribe community is important. A lot of the scheduled tribe communities, back when the constitution was written, were living off the land. The land here being largely forest produce and areas that did not see a lot of activity, other activities that are linked to development and other human activities such as animal husbandry and agriculture and so on and so forth. This was not seen in areas that saw a large concentration of ST population. And there was a need to protect their interests. These are people who lived off the land, who lived off the produce that came out of the forests. And this is still seen in today's India. It's not as common, but it is seen. And therefore, there is a need to protect their interests. So you cannot go there, reside there, move around there and eat into their resources. Literally, sometimes, because they eat what comes from the forest also. So you cannot go there and cause trouble for them. And this is considered to be very reasonable because there is a need to protect the people who have chosen that life for themselves. And sometimes they have not chosen, they just didn't have access to those, to other kinds of rights. But now you see that because of the reservation system and because of improvements in and development and improvements in education and so on and so forth, we see that a lot of members of such communities are also coming out and educating themselves and even joining the highest levels of bureaucracy and military service and other kinds of service that is available in the country, the other kinds of avenues that are available for everyone else in this country. This is being accessed by members of the ST community also. But at the same time, some of them choose not to do that. Some of them are still not able to do that. And therefore, we are protecting their interests by using the reasonable restriction under 19(5). 19(1)(f), the freedom to own property, buy and own property was removed from the constitution by the 44th Amendment. It allowed you to acquire, hold and dispose of property, and this was allowed under Article 19(1)(f), but that has been removed. The 44th Amendment of 1978 removed this, and by June 1979 it became effective. Now we move to one of the larger principles and one of the more important principles after 19(1)(a) that is available under 19(1), that is available under Article 19, which is Article 19(1)(g). This is the freedom or the right to practice any profession, carry on any business, trade or occupation. In the case of Sodan Singh versus New Delhi Municipal Corporation, NDMC, 1989, the court attempted to define profession, occupation, business and trade. And the court, once you read the definition, which is available in any standard, I'm not going into what the definition says because I believe I will end up confusing you. And why will I end up confusing you? It is because of something that the court said itself. After attempting to define, they said that these are analogous and overlap. They continuously overlap. So you cannot separate, you cannot put all of this, or you cannot put business and occupation and profession and trade in a bracket and say this is profession, this is business. They overlap and they continue to overlap. Although the court is attempting to draw out some boundaries, it doesn't really serve 100% of the purpose that it is looking to serve. What about education? is education a business? Initially in Unnikrishnan, 19.1G did not cover education, is what Unnikrishnan said. Unnikrishnan, state of Andhra Pradesh, the case that was which pioneered the concept of right to education as a fundamental right in India. Which cemented the position of right to education as a fundamental right, so to speak. Said that education is not a business, but it changed. This position changed in TMI Pi Foundation, again a case that we've looked at. In the TMI Pi case, the position was reversed and education was accepted as a business, as a profession. However, and you could even make profits, provided the profits from the education was going back into developing the facilities and the infrastructure and the quality of education that is being provided. So the money that comes from education goes back into the same sector, goes back into the same institution, goes towards developing that institution. But you cannot profiteer. The difference between profiting and profiteering is that profiteering looks at a very harsh, a very excess sense of profits, and there's an element of fraud and cheating and such other negative business practices associated with the term profiteering. You cannot profiteer out of education. That is looked down upon. That will not be allowed. Profits also, a reasonable amount of profits that are made are allowed, provided, however, that you put it back into the business, you put it back into the education. What are the reasonable restrictions that are available under 19.6, under which you can restrict the operation of these rights? It's the interest of the general public, state monopoly, and specific technical qualifications. General public, as discussed earlier, covers within interest of the general public, covers within its fold the concepts of safety, the concept of health, the concept of peace, concept of order. So again, you cannot be involved in the business of selling guns without license. It's not allowed in India, it's illegal, and it's detrimental to the general interest of the public. It negatively affects the operation of rights for some other person who does not want a gun. And another issue that keeps coming up under 19.1G is the concept of alcohol. We looked at is the concept of sale and consumption of alcohol. What is that a fundamental right? And this is also covered under morality as a concept, and morality affecting the general interest of the public. Needless to say, the sale of illegal and immoral goods, especially in public areas, illegal is not allowed anywhere, but something that affects the moral conscience, moral fabric of the society when being openly sold in public is not healthy for the people, is what the courts have said across multiple cases over multiple years. One of the major things that affects morality, as I just mentioned, is the sale and purchase of alcohol and the consumption of alcohol. We saw this in the FN Balsara case, which we learned in Article 13 also. But eventually the rough position is that alcohol is not necessarily the best thing for the society. It negatively affects the rights of the society. And therefore it shouldn't be available as freely as the right to sell alcohol shouldn't be available as freely as the right to, let's say, sell groceries or sell stationery. That those rights are available to the maximum extent and will be the most liberal interpretation will be adopted for these rights. However, for the sale of alcohol, there is a restricted sense. And now we come to the concept of unreasonableness. How do you determine the concept of unreasonableness under Article 19.6? What becomes unreasonable? Minimum Wage Act was questioned. Is it unreasonable to expect someone to pay a minimum wage to someone who is not even putting out the minimum expected output? But the court linked this Minimum Wage Act to the DPSPs and said that, look, there might be a situation where they're not doing the best that they should be doing, but you cannot pay them lesser than the basic amount, because without that, there will be no dignity in their life. And so if you have given them work, choose not to give them work, that's fine. They're not good enough, don't give them the work, but once you give them work, don't say that you'll pay them less than minimum wage. And therefore, the Minimum Wage Act is not detrimental to anyone's interests. It's something that the Supreme Court, and that is not an unreasonable restriction. Again, in Sukumar Mukherjee versus State of West Bengal, there was a law passed in West Bengal which said that medical professionals who are teaching in medical colleges will not be allowed to practice medicine. So if you're teaching if you're teaching medicine in a government medical college, you are given, and it's not just that they were stopped from practicing medicine, they were given some amount of money as an allowance, non-practicing allowance was given. This was challenged. They said this is unfair. This is against 19(1)(g). But the Supreme Court said that in the interest of the public, it is better that you merely teach and you work in that hospital where you're teaching. Don't do private practice. And you are not, there is nothing, you're not losing out on much. You're getting a salary as a teacher, and as part of that salary, there is a non-practicing allowance. So this is not unreasonable. However, what was unreasonable? In Chintaman Rao versus State of Madhya Pradesh, there was a restriction on people working in the BD industry. So in a certain area in Madhya Pradesh, a large number of people in that area were working in the BD factory or in the BD manufacturing business. A law was passed saying that from this particular area, no one will indulge in BD manufacturing. The reason why this law was made was because the BD industry paid more than normal agriculture, and a lot of people went to the BD industry instead of working in agriculture, which negatively affected agricultural produce. And the law tried to reduce that. So they said nobody from this X, Y, and Z villages will be allowed to work in the BD industry. Supreme Court said that is not reasonable at all. That is just not reasonable. You cannot do that. You can ask us that, you can say that 50% of this village will work in agriculture, 50% will work in BD. But you cannot say 100% of them have to go and work in agriculture. And you can make it cyclical. So some people will work in agriculture in one season and BD in the next. And then again, reverse. In the next season, people who work in the BD factory will go to the agricultural fields and work. And the agricultural workers will go to the BD factory. You cannot say that you just cannot work. Understood that agricultural interests are important. But this is not reasonable when you completely prevent someone from going to work in a certain area. Similarly, in Anuj Garg versus Hotel Association of India, a 2008 case, there was a ban on employing people below the age of 25 in places that served alcohol. This was in Maharashtra, because legally you're not allowed to consume alcohol in Maharashtra unless you're 25 years old. The court said that the restriction on consumption of alcohol is valid, but restricting people from working also in that sector just because they are not old enough to consume alcohol, there is no relation. I can work in a certain sector and still not consume it. So that was again held unreasonable. But requiring people to have a certain qualification to work in a certain sector is not unreasonable at all. So to work as a lawyer, you need LLB. That is not unfair. To work as a doctor, you need MBBS. That is not unfair. And it can never be unfair. It should never be unfair. I mean, a lawyer holding a scalpel and going for a surgery, is there any sense to it? See, again, challenges have been raised saying that this is unfair to me because I could have become a doctor, but they did not open any schools, because of which I couldn't go to schools. They did not open any colleges, because of which I couldn't go to the college. That is a genuine question, and that can be a breach of fundamental right. But it's a breach of fundamental right under other areas. So you can say that you've been discriminated against, your area is backward, and benefits should have been transferred to you under Articles 14 and 15, but it was not done. Your dignity has been affected under right to life. Your right to livelihood has been affected under right to life, Article 21. But you cannot go under 19(1)(g). That's simple. You're not a doctor, you're not a doctor. You're not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer. What about state monopoly? This is again something that we've looked at in the past. Monopolization of public transport. For example, private buses are not allowed in certain routes. In Karnataka, it's very common. In Bangalore, it's very common to only see BMTC buses. And this is pretty much the case across the country, except with some striking exceptions, such as Kerala, where public transport and private transport privately owned transport function in the realm of providing buses. And auto rickshaws, again, they are not state owned. Taxis, especially with the advent of Ola and Uber, they are not state owned. So you can see the coexistence, but at the same time, you can see how the states have monopolized also, especially in the area of train travel in India is the biggest example of state monopoly. The railways are completely monopolized. So in Deep Chand was a state of Madhya Pradesh in 1959, it was said that there is no restriction on what can be monopolized, and there is no restriction on whether after the monopoly, whether the it is the state who is operating it or whether it's a private player. So let's say, for example, that railways is monopolized, but we allow some company, let's say Tata or Reliance, to operate the trains. The railways itself are owned by the country, by the state, but the operations are taken care of by a certain private company. That is also allowed, but the private company here behaves as if it is an agent of the state. It behaves as if it is the state itself, and does not behave in a manner that leads to serving its own interest. It does not look to make profit for just itself. It can make a profit, but it does not make it makes a profit in terms of payment that it gets from the state. It cannot try and 30 rupees is what the ticket should cost according to the government. It cannot sell it at 50 and then take 20 and say it's my profit. Your right to make profit is protected by 19(1)(g), but that right to make profit is not going to be a right available to you if you are a private player who is working on behalf of the state. A lot of oil exploration, we have not opened it out completely to the private players. A lot of them operate in certain areas on behalf of the government. Even today, government monopolies exist, and these government monopolies are transferred to certain private players who are supposed to only work on behalf of the government. This is something that the court was very strict about. But then again, as I said, there is no restriction on what can be monopolized. You cannot say that I've been doing this for the last 100 years. My parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents have done the same business. Now you're monopolizing it. That's not fair. No, that is not a valid argument. However, why is there a need to monopolize it is a genuine question. How can you do it is not a genuine question. You can do it. Anything can be monopolized. Why are you monopolizing? Can all private airplane operators be nationalized tomorrow? Yes, it is a right of the country to nationalize all the SpiceJet, Indigo, Vistara, everything will become Air India tomorrow. Is it possible? Of course, most definitely. You cannot say how can you do that? No, but you can ask why. Indigo, Vistara, SpiceJet, all of them are doing much better than Air India, business-wise. It is proved that private aircraft carriers are doing a much better job than the government, considering the fact that Air India is bleeding money, it's loss-making, whereas the other private players are, Indigo is doing so well, Vistara, the services also are so much better, SpiceJet is also making a lot of money. At a point where if no one was buying planes in the world, SpiceJet went and purchased Boeing airplanes, and Donald Trump thanked SpiceJet for keeping the airline industry running. That's how well SpiceJet and Indigo and Vistara are doing. Others also are doing, I am not aware. So you can generally go to court and say, we're not saying how can the government do it. We understand that the government has absolute power to nationalize any sector of business. But we're just saying why. The government is failing at running its own aeroplane. Then what is the purpose of the government? And that is a genuine question. So 19(1)(g) lets you do a lot of things, provided it's not against general public interest. General public interest is very wide. It includes within its fold illegal activities. It includes within its fold public order, security of the state, sovereignty and integrity of India. Effectively, everything that is contained in 19(2) can be attributed to 19(6) through general public interest. And these clauses particularly are very commonly seen when it comes to the sale and purchase of alcohol. There's so many cases. Code Distillery is a famous case. For example, the Code Distillery case was one of the cases that made it absolutely clear and unambiguous that sale of alcohol is not a fundamental right. Manufacture of alcohol is not a fundamental right. It is sad that we have to sell alcohol, but it is necessary. The state needs, during this lockdown, why were the alcohol shops open? Because the state needs the money from alcohol to help people. And therefore, 19(1)(g) protects a lot of things, but it does not protect a lot of things also. Everything that is protected under 19(1)(g) will fall within 19(6) in the form of government monopoly, and it can all be taken away. So this is also reasonable. The standard of reasonable naturally is the test of Article 14, the test of arbitrariness. If it passes the test of arbitrariness, well and good. If it fails, then it is not allowed. It becomes unreasonable. And largely these freedoms are available for us to enjoy the rights and enjoy our life with dignity that is linked to Article 21. But there are limits. So as long as it meets the just, fair and reasonable principles of Article 21, procedure established by law, and the absence of arbitrariness under Article 14, and there is no discrimination as seen in 14, 15, 16, there is no exploitation as seen in Article 23, you are allowed to have any trade. Thank you so much.